Okay, good morning, everyone. Make sure you can hear me clearly. If you have any question, just let me know. Okay. So before I start today's class, one thing I want to emphasize this is regarding to exam. So in the exam, so there are a few students who couldn't make it for some reason, and so we will have a makeup exam. Most likely, perhaps like early next week, right? So if you haven't taken the exam, so just contact me as soon as possible so that so we can arrange the date. This is number one. And this other things regarding to exam is, so make sure you submit. So this is very important. Make sure you submit your exam, or make sure you finish your exam before the due time. Otherwise, your grade is going to be incomplete, right? So this is very, very important. Okay, so if you find out your grade is incomplete, let me know immediately so that I can fix that part for you. Okay, that's all I want to say before the class. Now let's just back to our discussion. Where we are in the third module. We're trying to make sense of the economy, right? So the first things we're trying to understand is what determines GDP, right? And so in last class, the way we do essentially relies on one equation. So this equation write as y equal to c as a function of y plus I as a function of y, okay? But there's going to be a long trip until we understand this equation. So far, so we focus on this part, these items in this equation, okay? So what we have done in last class, we look at two things. One, we look at marginal propensity to consume. And then, so we look at consumption function, essentially says C equal to, if we look at aggregate, A plus MPC times Y, right? Or sometimes we call it YD, okay? And then what this equation says is the consumption, so either is individual or aggregate consumption, is going to be a function of disposable income. But now just keep in mind, so there are three approaches to look at the GDP. So in that sense, so this income is also GDP, right? But in this equation, we look at expenditure, right? So here, so let me write down, this is income. But this equation coming from expenditure, the expenditure approach look at GDP, right? So, but from previous chapter, we knew, so whether you look at GDP through the lens of expenditure or look at GDP through the lens of income, both will give out the same number. So in that sense, so this Y and YD is interchangeable. And toward the end, so you're going to see, so this equation, inside this equation, there's really only one unknown, which is Y. Okay, so that's our first step to understand the determination of GDP. All right, so far, so we have finished this item, C as function of Y. Now we move to next part, which is I as a function of Y. But I guess we have a few slides before we move to I of Y. Okay, so this slide is regarding to what can affect your consumption spending. So that's regarding to this bullet point, how future income and aggregate wealth affects consumer spending. Right? Okay, so now let's go to the slide. So we have looked at this before. I mean, this is everything we have discussed so far. And make sure also, so we talk about multiplier effect, right? So this is particularly relevant given the current pandemic, right? So as I just mentioned many times, so when the economy is in big trouble like we are right now, the government typically do something to help the economy, like the current government is doing. What they did is they have some fiscal stimulus. And then the logic behind this fiscal stimulus largely comes from multiplier, right? As we can see, So if we have initial spending of 100 billion, but the aggregate impact on the economy is more than 100 billion, right? That depending on your MPC. And in this case, you can see, depending on MPC, if MPC is 0.6, you can see the net impact or the total impact on the economy is going to be 250 billion instead of 100 billion. Right? So that's the logic behind the government's fiscal stimulus. Okay? But here I want to emphasize we put a lot of assumptions to simplify analysis. In reality, the multiplier is much smaller than 2.5, or in reality, the multiplier is smaller than this number. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So we will come back this point later. For now, in this simplified model, okay. But again, so why we want to look at a simplified model? So we have sharp understanding how the economy works, right? So this is at the starting point, okay? But later, so I'm going to explain to you. So in reality, the multiplier is smaller than that, and explain to you why is that the case. Okay. All right. So we have been look at this and this as well. So we have looked at these practice questions, right? And I believe there is a question from a student regarding to autonomous spending somewhere. Let me see. So slides number 15. Let me just make sure. So all right. So in this slides, there was a question from a student. Ask me. So how we find out autonomous consumer spending, right? So to do that, really you need to understand what does autonomous consumer spending means. So this is the consumer must spend when income equal to 0. Right? Let me write down that equation again. C equal to A, so this look at individual, plus MPC times Y, right? And then, so in order to find out A, so essentially, you just look at what is going to be the consumption when Y equal to 0. Because when Y equal to 0, you can see C equal to A, or A equal to C, all right? So I can redo the exercise for this slide. So basically, so you have two information, right? So this individual is going to spend 8,000 when income is 10,000. Spend 14,000 when income is 20,000. Right? And then, so by looking at the changes in consumption and the changes in income, so we immediately know MPC equal to, like I explained to loss clause, the difference here is 10,000. And here difference is 6,000. Right? So and then MPC equal to 6,000 divided by 10,000 equal to 0.6. So then you just put here 0.6. Right? And then, so it really doesn't matter whether you use this equation or use this equation, you're going to find out A. Right? So actually you can verify. So if you look at the first equation, A is going to be 8,000 on the left hand side minus 6,000 on the right hand side. So A equal to 2,000. Now if you look at second equation, A equal to 14,000 minus 12,000. Okay, again, so you get 2,000, right? So that's how we get 2,000, right? And MPS, so remember, what we compute is MPC. So MPS equal to 1 minus MPC. So that's going to give you 0.4, right? So let me know, please, if you still get confused by these questions, okay? Right. So the last thing we discuss among is this consumption function. So essentially it tells us how consumer spending is going to adjust with consumer income. Right? There are two key things. One is this autonomous spending. The other is the slope of this line, which equal to MPC. Right? Okay. And then we also look at data versus, we look at our model or theory versus data. So this is our theory. So the dot is data. So you can see they just match almost perfectly. Right? So, but this for a given year. Now today I'm going to show you, so over time, so this trend may change slightly, and we need to understand what's going on. Okay. All right, so this, I believe this is the last slide we have looked at. So the aggregate consumption function essentially is a summation of individual consumption function. Right. All right, now we are ready to look at what can cause the aggregate consumption function to shift. Now here, so I want to remind you a concept or comparison of two concepts we discussed in micro review. So in micro review, we talk about supply and demand. And in supply and demand, we talk about a shift in supply or demand, and the change in the quantity supply and demand. Right? And then so similarly here, so we have shift in consumption function. Okay, so that just means the consumption function itself changed. Okay, so move up or move down. And then, so there must be a comparable concept. So that is referring to move along this consumption function. Right? So that's going to be, that's going to differ from shift. So shift means the consumption function change entirely. Move along this line just says the amount consumer want to consume is going to change. And the cause of that change along this line is due to changes in current disposable income. And the shift of this line is going to cause by something other than change your current disposable income. Now let's see what can cause a shift in aggregate consumption function. Okay, so if consumer expect higher aggregate income or wealth, okay, and then the consumer is going to increase their consumption. Why would they do that? It's because, so in the future, so they have higher income or wealth that allows them to borrow from future, right? So that's afford them to have higher consumption, right? And actually the curve shift up is called increasing consumption. How we understand that? It just says if my disposable income today is fixed at this level, so my consumption spending is going to increase by this amount. Okay, that's intuitively, this is an increase in consumption. And reversely, so if we have seen the situation, so the curve goes down, okay? And similarly, so this just means, so you have a drop in consumption, okay? So that is called a decrease in consumer spending, right? So similarly, so this must be the case, the consumer expect lower income or wealth, right? So they must tighten their belt. So they must save more, right? Just imagine what's going on right now, okay? So people, pretty much everyone's worried to lose their job, right? People worry, so they may have lower income, like stock market may crash, or housing market may crash, right? As a matter of fact, so today, so in the morning, so the stock market declined sharply, right? Because of the loss of uncertainty. So if that's the case, so you may want to hold on your purchasing decision. You may want to decrease your consumption, right? You prepare for rainy day, right? So this is shift in consumption function. Now in the next slides, so we will look at what cause shift, right? So typically, so the cause include changes in expected future disposable income and a change in aggregate wealth, right? So if there's a change in current disposable income, then so we are going to see a move along the consumption function, right? And the change in wealth is different from change in current disposable income. Okay, just make sure you see the difference, right? So what is considered as changes in aggregate wealth? Say currently you have a job and you have a stable job, and so the pay of your job is very stable. It doesn't change or hasn't changed yet, but somehow so the stock market boomed, or somehow the stock market crashed. So that is going to affect your wealth, right? Even though your income hasn't changed, but the change in your wealth is going to affect you mentally, all right? And then, so that's going to change your consumption behavior, okay? Actually, so we can look at the US data for a long horizon. You will see these things happen, right? So on the left-hand side, we look at 1930, from 1929 to 1940. Right? So each dot represents the aggregate observation in terms of disposable income and consumer spending. Just remind you, so those are aggregate number. Okay, so each dot represents 1 year. In that year, what is the total disposable income among American, and what is the total spending, consumer spending among American, right? So we look at 1930s, and so not surprisingly, so just remarkably, so you can see, so those data will be fit by a straight line, almost perfect, right? And this is the line we have just talked about. This is the consumption, right? So it just tells you how consumer spendings are going to adjust with disposable income. And from here, you can see this 0.7, that's the marginal propensity to consume. This is 160, so this is aggregate autonomous spending, right? Now, if we look at longer horizon, okay, so move to the right-hand side. So in the longer horizon, so here in this part, this is actually coming from the left-hand side. So this is 1930s, okay, during the time of the Great Depression. Now, if we look at post-World War II, so that is pretty much after 1945 till maybe 2000. What do we have seen from here? So there are two notable differences. Number one, during the post-World War II period, okay, so this line, the entire line shift up, right? So the way we see that is, so this is the line, this one. This is the line that represents consumer behavior for 1930. But now here, so you've seen another line is going to represent the post-World War II time better, right? This is number one. So the level increase. So in that sense, we have a shift up in consumption function for US economy, okay, after World War II. And the number two, so if you see that clearly or closely, let me erase everything. If you see, if you pay further attention in this region, you will notice the slope of this line is steeper compared to this one, meaning the MPC increase, right? So there are two notable differences. One, after World War II, you've seen a shift up of consumption function. Two, MPC increase, right? And what is behind the change? So certainly it's because after World War II, people becomes very optimistic about the economy, right? And then so they have stronger incentive to spend, right? And then they spend more. So that just go back to the discussion we have, what causes shift, right? And so you may wondering how would consumption function look like during pandemic, or maybe say, okay, in 2020s. Okay, so my guess is it's going to shift down a little bit, and it's become flatter, right? Because people worry about the future, right? Okay, and then there are lots of uncertainty. All right, so now we are ready to look at second part of this chapter. Essentially, we look at I as a function of Y. Just remind yourself, we started with Y equal to C plus I, right? Some student may say, oh, so professor, you forgot about G and X. Now I will remind you, so we start with a simplified version. So no government, no rest of work, right? So we just focus on this simple characterization. Okay? I also want to remind you in the United States, so C is a big item inside expenditure. It's close to 70%, and I is close to 10%. So you can see, so these two explain a big chunk of aggregate expenditure. Okay, so now let's look at I. I itself, in terms of absolute value, itself is very small, right? But however, it fluctuates drastically. Now look at here. So this is from 1937 to 2009. And we look at 6 episodes of recession. Let's just look at most recent one. Okay, so this is 2007 to 2009. So during the most recent recession, okay, so the consumption and investment, they both decline. But you can see their change is quite significantly different, right? So the decline in consumption is tiny, 1.6%, but decline in investment spending is drastic, is dramatic, is 24%. How we understand that, and what's the implication? The way we understand that is, so you can't adjust your consumption too much. So here, what are the main components of consumption? Those include food. Those include shelter. Those include maybe education. Even though we are in a recession, do you think you can cut your food by a significant amount? Probably not, right? Okay, what is investment? So investment here, just think about buy a new house or bigger house. Okay, or think about you have a new car, or think about a business. So the business expand their factory. So you can see, so if the recession hits, if the economy is not doing well, and then so probably you want to stop or you want to postpone your upgrade plan for your house, right? You may want to postpone or stop your original plan of buy a new car, better car. Similarly, that's the case for business, right? So in that sense, there are more flexibility in terms of investment adjustment, or in some sense, it has lower priority compared with consumption, right? Okay, now we need to see what drives investment spending. Okay, so here we list 3 most important factors can cause change in investment spending. But certainly, so this just show investment spending as a function of disposable income, as we discussed in the first half of this chapter. Number one, interest rate. So interest rate essentially is the cost of investing, right? Just think about mortgage rate. Think about car loans. Okay? So if you can take 0% of APR to buy a new car versus you must pay 10% of APR to buy a new car. Just ask yourself, under which case you want to buy a new car? Certainly with 0%, right? So this is how interest rate affect investment spending. Okay. Second, expected future GDP. So if we are expecting the future GDP is going to increase, or we are expecting after election, we are going to have a booming economy. So how are you going to adjust the investment spending? So certain things you want to expand. Let's think about the business, right? So because you know that the demand is going high in the future, right? Okay, now third factor is current level of production capacity. What this means, just looking around. So we have so many local business. They have been constrained. They have been partially open due to the pandemic. Do you think they have incentive to invest? I doubt, right? So they haven't fully utilized their capacity yet. Why would they want to do additional investment spending? Okay? So those are the three factors can cause your investment decision. But here we want to differentiate between planned, but then currently we have unplanned investment spending. So what is planned? Planned investment spending is investment spending that business intend to undertake during a given period. It's your expected. It's what you have planned, right? So you are going to forward looking. You are going to have expectation regarding to the economy. And then based on the interest rate, based on the expected future, real GDP, and based on current level of production capacity. So you have a plan. This is a plan regarding to how many investment you want to do. Okay. Okay. So if we look at the data, you can see interest rate are often the cost of investment project. Or in other words, interest rate is going to affect investment quite significantly, as I just explained to you a few minutes ago, right? But here just give you the data to support the argument I just made. Okay. Right. So here, this is another slide. Just explain what I told you. Right. Expected future real GDP production capacity will affect investment spending. Okay. Now, to finish this part, so we need to look at a few additional concepts. Okay, there are 4 concepts. First is called inventory, which are stocks of goods held to satisfy future sale. Just imagine you go to Costco or Baker's or a car dealership, right? So they always has additional amount of goods put in their storage, just in case. So the demand is strong, right? And so that those additional stock of goods is called inventory, right? So why they want to put inventory? They just for incoming shoppers, right? What is inventory investment? That's the value of a change in total inventories held in the economy during a given period. So it's easier to think about a business, right? Say a car dealership, right? So typically they may put 10 cars in their garage, right? Why they want to put 10 cars? Because they do not want a disappointed customer walk away without a car because you have no car to let them to drive, right? Or you told them, so you have to wait. We order a new car. It may take like 1 month or 2 months. So you don't want to see that. So that's why you have inventory. Okay? But what is inventory investment? Just imagine if suddenly, so people get very excited or get very optimistic about the economy. Okay? And then so they can sold this car in this 10 car like in 2 days once the car arrived, right? And so and then suddenly there's no car in their garage. But in regular time, so they sell the car, sell maybe 5 car in the month, and toward the end of the month, they have new car comes in. So they maintain 10 cars in their inventory. Now suddenly they sold so fast, so they are going to see a decline in inventory. So this decline in inventory is called inventory investment. But now this inventory investment is negative, right? On the other hand, so if the demand's very low, get very weak, they cannot sell the car, right? But at the end of each month, there are new cars coming as usual. So now you can see the inventory investment is piling up. Okay. So what is unplanned inventory investment? Those are unplanned change in inventory occurring when actual sales are more or less than business expected, right? So that being said, if the demand is very weak, as I just said, and then unplanned inventory investment will be positive, right? On the other hand, if demand is very strong, then unplanned inventory investment will be very low or negative. Okay? Then actual investment spending is the sum of planned plus unplanned, right? So those are the definition. Okay? So or summarize, I equal to I planned it plus I unplanned. Okay, so we have finished this slide. Now, as usual, let's take 5 minutes break. And when we come back from break, we will look at next chapter.